And my mom? She married a factory worker. But hey, we all start somewhere, right? The microphone caught every word, every smug syllable. The ballroom echoed with a mix of champagne giggles and forced chuckles from people in tuxedos who didn't know me, didn't care, and wouldn't remember my name. I stood near the back, beside the server station. Just another invisible man in a rented suit, glass in hand, pretending I wasn't bleeding behind the smile. She didn't even glance my way as she delivered the punchline, just raised her mimosa to the glittering chandelier, basking in the glow of her new in-law's approval. Her husband laughed too hard. His father patted him on the back. Some tech CEO leaned over and said, "Blue-collar roots. Humbling, right?" They all nodded, wine glasses clinking, pearls flashing. To them, I was just part of the origin story she was so proud to leave behind. A detail, a joke. What none of them knew, what she clearly never bothered to learn, is that I paid for this wedding. All of it. The venue, the catering, the 5-tier cake she insisted on just for the photos. Even the $12,000 dress, which she cried over when her real dad couldn't contribute, but quickly forgot to thank me for once the cameras came out. But sure, factory worker. She wasn't wrong. I was a factory worker. 37 years on the floor, maintenance, production, then logistics. The kind of man who fixes the machines when they jam at 2 a.m. so someone else can meet their quarterly bonus. The kind of man who raises a daughter that isn't his by blood, only to be erased the second a better surname walks through the door. I stood quietly through the rest of the toast, clapped when I had to, smiled in photos. I even gave a short speech, careful not to embarrass her. Didn't mention how many nights I sat in my car after double shifts trying to figure out how to make her student loan payment and keep the lights on. Didn't bring up the time I sold my watch, my father's watch, to pay for her college books because she needed all originals, not used. I let all that stay buried. But when I got home that night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of her words, but because of what they meant. She had rewritten the story. She cut me out of it entirely. There's something hollow that happens when you realize you were just a placeholder, a prop in someone else's success montage. I wasn't a man anymore, not to her. I was a footnote. And the worst part? It wasn't even personal to her. That's what hit the hardest. She hadn't meant it cruelly. She had meant it conveniently. It was easier for her narrative to begin with poverty, a noble struggle, a climb. Me? I was just the dirt she planted herself in so she could bloom in someone else's garden. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I logged into an old portal on a dusty laptop, one that hadn't seen daylight since the pandemic. It was still connected to my old network. I typed in a string of numbers from memory, an old ticker code, Marvix. It was still active, still struggling. The shares were scattered, mostly family held, but some had been sold off, quietly, over years, to stay liquid. I knew where some of them landed, because back then, I helped broker the first downsizing plan when the market dipped. The plan they implemented? My spreadsheet, my model. They used my numbers to cut 200 jobs, including my own. And they thought I went away. They thought I disappeared into the smokestacks and rebar. But I didn't. That night, with the echo of her voice still ringing in my ears, I made a decision. It starts now, I thought. Not with rage, not with fury, with silence and spreadsheets. And one by one, the dominoes would fall. If you're listening this far, you're part of the 10% who actually hit the follow button. And it means the world to the team who puts these together daily. Most never do. But if you are that one who does, it keeps this going stronger than you know. Now back to the story. The first time she called after the wedding, it wasn't to say thank you. It wasn't to share photos. It was to ask if I could cover the security deposit on their new condo. "We're liquid right now," she said breezily, like it was a diet. Matt's between bonuses, and I told him we wouldn't need to ask his dad. Right. Can't disappoint the yacht club. I wired the money. No questions. No complaint. I said something like, "Just let me know if you need anything else." She didn't hear the weight behind anything else. Didn't ask if I was okay. Didn't mention the toast. She hung up with a rushed, "Love you," before the dial tone settled. It was transactional, like ordering extra dressing at a restaurant. And I was the condiment. That pattern held. Weeks passed. When she did text, it was vague. "How's everything? Hope the new year's starting well." But when her mother texted, it was different. Quiet apologies. "She's just overwhelmed," she said. Trying to fit in with his family. His family. The same people who spent the reception cracking jokes about grit and bootstrap stories, as if she were a rescued stray they graciously welcomed in. But I kept showing up. At her birthday brunch, I brought flowers. I was seated at the end of the table, next to someone's cousin from Michigan who didn't speak unless spoken to. The centerpiece was a custom cake that cost more than a month of my rent. I didn't say much. Midway through, I heard her say to a man in golf slacks, "Oh, that's my stepdad. He's in labor or something. Factories, maybe logistics." She didn't even look my way. The man nodded politely, then turned back to her husband's father. Some conversation about Q1 margins and offshore restructuring. I kept sipping my coffee, burned my tongue on purpose. I wanted to feel something sharp. Later, when they handed out party favors, hand-embroidered linen napkins, I slipped mine into my pocket. Not out of sentiment, just habit. I used to save napkins from factory send-off parties too. Some were signed. Some just smelled like grease and regret. That night, I sat in my den, lights off, laptop glowing. Logged into the secure portal I'd set up years ago. Not under my name, of course. Proxy logins. Discrete credentials. When you work floor level for decades, you learn the real power is in paperwork. People forget that. But systems don't. Marvix Holdings was bleeding capital. Their offshore operations had stalled. Internal reshuffling had left them bloated in middle management and thin at the top. They were pushing expansion, fast. Too fast. I knew this pattern. I'd lived through it. These weren't cracks. They were pre-collapse tremors. Her father-in-law had made too many ego bets. Built for appearances, not endurance. Their stock was held in fragments. The family trust owned the biggest chunk, but outside investors had chipped away at it. Quietly. Desperately. That's when opportunity walks in, dressed like a janitor. I emailed someone I hadn't spoken to in years. A name I used to whisper when I still thought of the future like a door I hadn't opened yet. I wrote, simply, "Remember the Shanghai proposal? It's time." 2 hours later, I had a list. Partial shareholders, retirement accounts, fringe fund managers, desperate people in nice suits. The kind who'd sell quietly if you made the offer look boring. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was due diligence. But the itch had started. I remembered the way she introduced me. In labor or something. I wasn't angry. I was curious. Curious what she'd say the day she realized I knew exactly how much their empire was worth, and how to buy it without her even noticing. I reached out to Louis the same way I used to back, when we still wore hard hats and called each other sir sarcastically. Back then, he ran procurement. Now he ran something more discreet. Asset pipelines for people who preferred their fingerprints off the glass. If you wanted a painting moved through customs, or a corporate seat acquired without a press release, Louis was your guy. I texted him just 5 words. "Still good at hiding things?" He replied with a single emoji, a winking face, and a $sign. We met the next day, not in some private lounge or backroom poker game, but at a car wash. Louis liked keeping moving. Said static locations made people itchy. As my truck crept forward through soap and spinning brushes, he handed me a sealed envelope through the cracked window. Inside, a typed list. Page after page of Marvix Industrial's minority shareholders. Retirement portfolios. Disgruntled former VPs, divorced sons. Cousins who had no idea what they even owned anymore. That's the beauty of generational wealth. It gets diluted. Dilution breeds desperation. And desperation makes people sloppy. I opened a spreadsheet and went to work. We didn't buy directly, of course. That would have set off alarms. I built a ladder of shelf firms. Nevada, Luxembourg, and one curious nonprofit in Ontario. Each firm controlled by another. Each link just clean enough to pass compliance, but murky enough to dodge headlines. Week by week, we pulled in shares. Never more than 3% at a time. Just small nibbles. But voting shares? That was the target. And those came easier than expected. One old executive had a granddaughter in debt. Another just wanted out before his second divorce. All it took was quiet offers, better terms than the market, and no questions asked. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed. It was a photo. Her, in front of a white BMW, smiling like the dealership had handed her the keys to self-worth. Caption, "Hard work pays off." I clicked save and dropped it in a folder called Narratives. She didn't know I'd been watching the Marvix shares fall 5 points that morning. Didn't realize the back-end liquidity crunch her father-in-law was sweating through. She thought the world spun on brunches and Instagram filters. She thought work was putting together a vision board. I thought work was buying the board. By spring, one of our shells crossed 15%. Enough to trigger a disclosure. We preempted it. Dumped that holding into another firm across 3 jurisdictions. Then reduced the stake to 12.9%. Enough to keep voting leverage, but low enough to stay off the radar. The lawyers we used? Same ones her father-in-law's team had pushed out last year for thinking too small. Funny how too small becomes precisely right. When you want to bleed the edges of an empire without making a sound. I didn't need to be on the board. I just needed enough pull behind the curtain to steer the room without entering it. The company was bloated, margins thinning. Expansion had been fueled by debt, and they masked it with buzzwords: global presence, supply agility, tech-forward repositioning. In real terms, it meant they outsourced cheap, ran lean, and smiled on LinkedIn. But I knew their contracts. I'd seen the cracks 5 years ago. They never patched them. I sent Lewis a message: next phase. Leverage prep. He replied, already moving. That night, I sat on my porch, same chair I used to drink coffee in before dawn shifts. Same creek. Same view of a backyard I'd mowed too many times. Except now, the difference was this: I wasn't mowing grass anymore. I was mowing legacy. And I'd started with the family who laughed at mine. It started with ball bearings. That's how fragile it all was. A single component, trivial, mass-produced, nearly invisible in the end product. But the factory overseas that made them? Shut down for environmental noncompliance. That's the phrase the report used. What it meant was, someone finally paid attention to the river they'd been poisoning for years. What it meant for Marvix Industrial was a shipment delay. Then 2. Then 15. Margins collapsed. Deadlines broke. Clients got nervous. And then someone leaked the internal memo. It was a nothing email, really. Just a terse update from supply chain management outlining contingency options. But one sentence stuck out: reallocating labor to offset projected liabilities. That phrase. Catnip to regulators. Within days, Marvix was being examined by 2 government agencies. Their stock flatlined, then twitched down 3 points. Their biggest contract, government, naturally, went into review. The board began to cannibalize itself, pointing fingers, rewriting forecasts, squeezing vendors who were already neck-deep in debt themselves. The family circled wagons. I watched from the perimeter. She texted me one night: crazy week. Everyone at work's on edge. I guess my father-in-law's company might be sold. Some ghost fund is circling. I read it twice, then typed back: that's so. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. That was the dance now. Her floating in high society bubbles, me operating beneath them like pressure valves. The ghost fund she referred to was, in fact, one of our holding vehicles, Graymont Equity, registered in Delaware, managed offshore, owned by 3 entities that only existed on paper and email signatures. It submitted an interest letter to Marvix's board through a merger's attorney who once brokered energy acquisitions for a Saudi prince. The offer was vague. Intent to stabilize operations. Inject long-term value. No public names. Just numbers. It was bait. And they bit like starving dogs. The father-in-law, Richard, called for an emergency board meeting. I had the minutes within an hour. Lewis had friends in IR who owed favors. Apparently, Richard had punched the table. Twice. I built this company, he shouted. I will not hand it over to some faceless consortium of opportunists. Except he would. Because the debt agreements were structured like trapdoors, and the bank didn't care whose name was on the building if the payments weren't made. A restructuring was inevitable, and we would be the ones to offer salvation, the same way vultures offer cleanup. At dinner the next week, she brought it up again, half amused, half oblivious. I swear, my poor father-in-law's aging 10 years a week. He's convinced this fund's going to dismantle everything. Keeps muttering about bloodsuckers in suits. I told him, maybe it's karma for what he did to Uncle Brian. She didn't explain what he'd done to Uncle Brian. She just giggled into her wine and changed the subject. I stirred my tea. Earl Grey. No sugar. I never took sugar anymore. That's so. I said again. She didn't look up. The room around us hummed with luxury. Designer furniture. A $700 candle flickering. Her husband was across the room, explaining golf analytics to someone who didn't care. Their dog, a white fluff ball named after a wine, barked at shadows. She looked happy. Or maybe not happy, installed. Like a carefully curated picture frame in a house staged for sale. And yet, she still didn't ask what I'd been up to. Still didn't wonder why I hadn't asked for the brunch photos she said she'd send. Still didn't notice that my watch had changed, or that I no longer drove the rust-colored Tacoma. She had already filed me away in her mind. I was still the man in labor or something. So I smiled, ate my roast, and let the trap do its work. They'd asked for a meeting with the unnamed buyer. We'd scheduled it for next Thursday. Location, neutral. Agenda, restructuring, asset reevaluation, operational control. In translation, ownership, transfer, endgame. And I would walk through the door, not as her stepfather, but as their reckoning. The meeting was set for 9 a.m. sharp. Confidential. No digital invites. No assistants allowed in the room. Only board members, legal counsel, and immediate family. Richard, her father-in-law, insisted on that. Too many leaks, he said. We need silence. Silence was the only thing I planned to break. They booked the back conference suite at the high-rise downtown. The one with the floor-to-ceiling windows and wood-paneled walls designed to make people forget their bleeding money. I arrived 30 minutes early. Not through the front. Not with security. Through the garage, escorted by a firm that technically didn't exist. One of the lawyers opened the door for me like I was royalty. He knew what this was. The assistant, a thin man who looked like he hadn't slept in 2 weeks, leaned into Richard's ear. He's flying in today. The new owner said it's non-negotiable. Richard scowled, poured another whiskey into his coffee mug, and grumbled something about cowards hiding behind shell companies. He looked like a man circling his own grave and blaming the wind for digging it. Inside the boardroom, the mood was brittle. The CFO shuffled papers he wouldn't read. One legal rep kept checking her phone for updates that wouldn't come. Her husband sat at the edge of the table, trying to look important. She, meanwhile, perched next to him in that same tailored coat she wore during her engagement photo shoot. The one with the fur lining and fake modesty. Arms folded, mouth tight, but still smug. Still clueless. No one had told her. That was intentional. Her mother wasn't there. She had called me the night before, voice cracking. Do what you need to do, she said. Just don't destroy her. I didn't respond. At exactly 9:01, the door opened. I walked in. I didn't rush. No dramatics. No big entrance. Just a quiet, measured walk to the head of the table, my steps echoing in the panic they tried to swallow. I wore the same watch I used to fix machines with, now restored, polished, ticking like a countdown. She gasped. Her fork, still clutched from a half-eaten fruit plate, dropped onto her plate with a sharp clang. Her husband didn't even turn to her. He just stared at me, blinking, mouth half open, as if trying to compute a new equation in a language he'd never learned. Richard went pale. What is this? He asked, standing halfway, like someone bracing for a heart attack or divine judgment. I didn't answer. I just placed the folder on the table. Thick, bound, custom tabbed. The top page read, Proposed Operational Restructuring and Ownership Transition, Marvix Holdings. They didn't open it. I watched Richard scan my face for signs of humor. This is some sick joke. You don't belong here. I sat across from him, slowly, deliberately. Then I leaned forward, hands folded, and looked at each of them, one by one. No rush. I belong anywhere my name is on the papers, I said. She whispered, You're the investor? I turned to her, finally, and smiled. You mean the ghost fund? She flinched. I told them you were just my stepdad, she stammered. You're in labor. You worked. I still do, I cut in. Just not the kind you can see from a brunch table. The lawyer at the end of the table cleared his throat. Mr. Keller, he said, finally addressing me by the name they'd conveniently forgotten. We weren't aware. You weren't meant to be, I replied, until it was too late. Then I slid the second document across the table, shorter, more lethal. It was the voting control transfer. Signed, stamped, backed by multiple holdings, all owned, ultimately, by me. Effective immediately, I said calmly. You're relieved of operational authority, Richard. The board's been dissolved. Your expansion plans are canceled. And all compliance investigations are now internal. The room didn't breathe. Not for 10 full seconds. Her husband whispered, This can't be real. She just stared. Eyes glossy, lips parted. Her illusion didn't shatter. It evaporated. Right in front of everyone. Richard stood, fists clenched, eyes wide. You think you can walk in here and take what I built? I gave my life to this company. I didn't blink. You didn't give, I said. You sold, bit by bit, to anyone who'd make the bleeding stop. And then I added, just for her. You laughed when she mocked me. You poured champagne over my name. Now you'll work for it. No one spoke. No one could. They got what they wanted, just not how they expected. The folder I opened made a soft, deliberate thump against the mahogany. Nothing flashy. Just thick paper, clean type, no logo. That was intentional. Let them feel the weight. Effective immediately, I began. Core operations will remain under internal management. I'll be replacing the current board, individually and entirely, by close of business tomorrow. Overseas expansion is frozen. No exceptions. A murmur rippled across the room. The CFO dropped his pen. One of the lawyers, a man with more gel than spine, leaned forward. With respect, sir, That move would violate sections 14C through 18A of the corporate charter. It requires a unanimous board vote to trigger replacement. I didn't look up. Instead, I reached into the folder again, removed a single page, set it on the table. Shareholder authorization. Voting block, 61%. Acquired through consolidated entities as of 3 days ago. Reviewed. Notarized. Finalized. Silence. The attorney blinked like a man trying to remember his own name. That can't be accurate. I slid a second copy toward him. It is. You're welcome to review it. Richard sank back into his chair, jaw tight, hands folded like he was trying to remember how power had once tasted. He looked older than he had 20 minutes ago. The kind of old that starts in your bones when you realize the game you thought you were playing ended 4 quarters ago. She sat still, like a statue carved from regret. I didn't look at her, not yet. I turned to her husband instead. He hadn't spoken since I entered. But now his voice cracked. This isn't. You don't understand how this will look. The market, I interrupted, is already watching. And they prefer stability. Not scandals. Not family spats. Not headlines about insider dysfunction and offshore labor violations. They'll welcome the shift. Quietly. Gratefully. The third lawyer, a junior partner, barely out of grad school, whispered, But this affects everyone. It'll cripple their legacy. You're gutting it. I leaned back. I'm not gutting it. I'm preserving what's still worth salvaging. The rest. I turned to the floor-to-ceiling window behind me. It burns either way. I'm just choosing where the fire starts. That's when she spoke. Quiet. Small. Why didn't you tell us? She wasn't looking at me. She was looking through me, like a child who's touched a flame and finally learned it burns. I didn't answer at first. Let the silence stretch, tense and electric. Then, finally, without turning my head, you told them I wasn't worth knowing. A pause. And then, still flat. You didn't say it with words. You said it with omission. With that toast. With that brunch. With the introductions. You wanted me edited out of your story. So I gave you what you asked for. She blinked, mouth opening, then closing again. Nothing came out. That silence, the one that followed. It was louder than any argument, louder than any scream. It was the sound of relevance collapsing, of illusions dying. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. There was no triumph in my expression, no gotcha grin. Just stillness. Because it wasn't revenge anymore. It was reclamation. They hadn't just underestimated me. They'd erased me. And now, in the room they thought they ruled, I had become the gravity. Every decision from this point forward would orbit me, not them. The press release hit inboxes at 8:15 a.m. on a Monday. Just early enough to own the news cycle, just late enough to make sure every investment analyst, business reporter, and mid-tier executive was already seated with a lukewarm coffee in hand. Marvix Holdings announces structural rebrand under new ownership. That was the subject line. But the body was what mattered. The name Marvix, the badge of Richard's bloodline, his signature, his ego, was gone. Replaced with something cleaner, older. Keller and Sons Manufacturing. A nod to the original company founded in 1937 by a Polish immigrant with 3 machines and 1 rented garage. The logo? A minimalist gear and torch, lifted from the company's pre-war signage. No gilded serif fonts. No swooshes. Just legacy, real legacy. Her husband's last name? Absent. Richards? Scrubbed. No trace of them remained. The and Sons part wasn't literal. I never had any. But the phrase had always haunted me, like something I might have earned in another life. One where I got credit for showing up. That Monday, I didn't answer any calls. My inbox flooded with congratulations, media requests, LinkedIn connection invites from people who used to step around me in parking lots. I declined every single one. Let the numbers speak. Let the headlines whisper. But I did make one private call. His name was Sam Alvarez. He was my supervisor back when I was just 22, fresh off a divorce, broke, and barely keeping up with rotating night shifts at the East plant. He used to keep a thermos of soup in his locker for whoever needed it. Never said a word about it. Just let you take it and move on with your dignity intact. He answered on the 3rd ring. Hello. It's Keller, I said. From Tower Line 3. A pause. No kidding, he said, voice cracking. I thought you disappeared. Not quite. I've been repurposing. We didn't talk long. I asked for an address. Didn't explain why. That afternoon, a chilled bottle of Périgoût Belle Époque was delivered to his trailer in a battered box with a handwritten note tucked inside. Thank you for giving me the night shift when I needed it most. Some debts never go unpaid. Back online, the ripple had begun. Industry blogs dissected the rebrand like surgeons. Some praised it as a return to substance. Others speculated it was symbolic of a cultural purge. They weren't wrong. She posted nothing. No story. No caption. No clever quote. Her friends noticed. One of them, some influencer with a teeth-whitening brand, left a comment on her last photo from a ski trip. What happened with your FIL's company? Is that still a thing? No reply. Another messaged her directly. Didn't your husband's dad start Marvix? Why is it called Keller & Sons now? Again, silence. People talk. Silence becomes the loudest sound in a room full of vanity. But that was the point. This wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't want her screaming, didn't need her begging. I didn't want to destroy her. That would have made her the centerpiece again. No, I wanted her excluded, omitted, forgotten. Let her sit at the brunch tables, sipping rose, pretending nothing's changed while everyone around her now knows the truth, knows the story, and she can't explain it without admitting how badly she misjudged me. I didn't erase her. I just didn't mention her. There's a difference, and it cuts deeper. Her father-in-law's legacy was a smudge now, unremarkable, expired. Her husband? A footnote. Their empire had been refiled under corrected, and I, the man mocked for being in labor or something, had rewritten every line of the chapter they thought they owned. One press release, one name change, and they were gone. The first public shift wasn't dramatic. No scandals, no televised breakdowns, just subtraction, the kind of social death that doesn't come with flames, but frost. It started with the RSVPs. She sent out 80 invitations for her annual giving brunch, a polished affair she had inherited from Richard's wife and rebranded as her own. Custom calligraphy, floral letterpress, a sponsorship from a skincare startup. Normally, people begged for a seat. This year, only 3 guests confirmed. One canceled the morning of. One arrived late and left before dessert. The last one brought her dog and didn't even pretend to donate. The caterer said they'd ordered for 75. She posted no photos, no captions, not even a story. Just vanished into digital silence while her inbox filled with passive-aggressive regrets. Oh, I thought it was moved. Next year for sure. We've been swamped, sorry. She knew what it meant. Donors had started pulling their contributions without explanation. Brands she used to tag in lifestyle posts quietly untagged her. A local art gallery removed her husband from their executive patrons page. And no one said it out loud, but everyone knew. The whisper started at the club. You could feel it in how women glanced over glasses, how men offered stiff nods instead of embraces. It wasn't anger. It was distance. That subtle social punishment reserved for people who married the wrong power. She married the wrong man in the family. Someone muttered at a garden party. A phrase that passed lips like steam, untraceable but inescapable. A joke? A judgment? It didn't matter. It stuck. Then the article landed. Not a tabloid hit piece. Not scandal-driven. Just a clean, respectful business profile in a mid-tier financial journal. The new owner of Marvix, once labeled a factory worker, now controls $480 million in assets. It included a quote from an anonymous former board member. We underestimated him. That was our mistake. Her phone buzzed nonstop for 2 hours. She didn't post a thing. Instead, she sat on the edge of their couch while her husband paced the room like a man who just realized he brought a knife to a gunfight. You said he was nobody, he snapped. That he fixed machines. That he'd be grateful just to be invited. She tried to explain, but her voice cracked. She mentioned how she thought he was just quiet. Background. Harmless. You told me he used to clean parts. Amy, he barked. You didn't say he was a strategist. You didn't say he could do this. She didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Because she hadn't known. Because she hadn't cared to know. She cried quietly, facing the window, hoping the neighbors weren't close enough to hear. The worst part wasn't the embarrassment. It was the vacuum. He hadn't gloated. He hadn't posted. He hadn't said a single word to the press, which meant the world had filled in the blanks without him, and it had still chosen him. People stopped asking about her charity brunches. They started asking about Keller & Sons. She had married into the wrong dynasty, and now she couldn't even spell the name of the right one. It started on a Monday, like most quiet detonations do. A mid-tier lifestyle influencer, someone who had been at the wedding but hadn't spoken to her since, posted a throwback reel on Instagram. Aesthetic filter. Lo-fi music. Caption. 1 year ago today, at one of the wildest weddings I've ever attended. At first, it didn't catch. A few hundred views. Then 1,000. Then 20. The clip was only 15 seconds long, shot from a low angle, slightly tilted, champagne flute in frame. Her voice, unmistakable, rang out clear over the mic. cutting through the polite applause. My stepdad? Factory guy. Reliable. Simple. The kind of man who always shows up and lets you grow. Laughter. Smirks. Some clapping from the in-laws' side. Her tone had dripped with the casual condescension of someone who didn't realize they were cutting bone with every syllable. But now it was a soundtrack for her own unraveling. The comments came in waves. And that factory guy just bought your legacy. Reliable, simple, and now your boss. This aged like unpasteurized milk. She really narrated her own downfall. Within 12 hours, it was on TikTok. A stitched duet with someone nodding sarcastically over the words, mouth sinking. Factory guy. Reliable. Simple. The phrase trended on Twitter the next morning. Hashtag factory guy. A few people posted side-by-side screenshots. Her champagne-filled smirk at the mic, and the press photo of the new Keller & Sons logo being installed. One meme showed her wedding speech alongside a stock photo of a boardroom. Caption: she called him simple. He called a vote. Her inbox exploded. Texts, mentions, some mocking, some sympathetic, but none helpful. The influencer who'd posted it messaged her. Didn't realize this would blow up. LMK if you want me to take it down. She didn't respond. She just stared at the screen as the view count climbed past 1 million. Then 2. She called him that evening. The phone rang 6 times. Then voicemail. She didn't leave a message. Didn't need to. On his end, the phone sat face up on a marble counter, silent. He was home. Lights low. Fire crackling. The sound of his new espresso machine hissing quietly in the background. He didn't answer, but he watched the clip. Once. Didn't flinch. Didn't pause. Didn't even frown. Just let it play. Then tapped save. He filed it in a folder called Echoes, a private archive, where memories didn't disappear, they just waited for relevance. He didn't share it. Didn't post it. Didn't even mention it to Lewis. Because some trophies don't go on shelves. Some trophies are reminders of how words, once spoken with arrogance, echo louder than applause when truth finally arrives. She had made him invisible. Now the whole world was watching her see him. It was raining, not heavily, but the kind of steady, soaking rain that seems to cleanse everything it touches. The factory gates opened for him without a badge. They all knew him now, not as the guy who used to clock in with a lunch pail and thermos, but as the man whose name was now etched into the stainless steel plaque by the main entrance. Keller & Sons Manufacturing. EST 1937. Reclaimed 2023. 1 year to the day. He didn't bring an entourage. No press. No photographers. Just him, in a charcoal coat with calloused hands tucked neatly into the pockets. Same boots he wore his last shift, repaired, polished, dignified. The same guard who once patted him down now held the door open like a doorman at a luxury hotel. Inside, the building still smelled like metal and oil and memories. Not all of them good, but all of them earned. He took the long walk down Line C, where the machine used to jam every third cycle unless you leaned into it just right. He stopped to talk to a woman running calibration on a newer model. Her name tag said Jenny. He asked how she liked the shift schedule. She said the new system was better, more humane. He nodded, not proud, just satisfied. Further down, someone handed him a clipboard. He signed it without hesitation. They'd implemented his policies: clean breaks, transparent overtime, merit-based promotions. Not one executive had stepped foot on this floor since the rebrand. He had. As he exited through the side door, the one only workers used, never board members, a black SUV rolled up fast and stopped crooked across 2 marked spots. The back door opened. Richard stepped out, not in a suit, not in arrogance, in desperation, hair disheveled, a cheap umbrella sagging against the wind. The man who once spat orders at a room full of yes-men now looked like he'd aged 20 years in one. Please, he said, the word stiff in his throat like it was borrowed. Can we talk? He paused, water dripping from the brim of his coat, looked Richard up and down, then stepped in, just close enough for the old man to feel the gravity shift. You laughed when she mocked me, he said softly. Each word landed with surgical weight. You toasted her ignorance. You watched them erase me. You smiled. Richard opened his mouth, but nothing came out. You want a conversation now? He added. Here's one. You don't sit at the table anymore. You get the reports I let you see. You sign the things I've already decided. And if you ever forget that again, check the name on the building. Then he stepped back. No shouting. No threats. Just precision. He turned, walking toward the exit, the sound of steel doors groaning open in front of him like a kingdom parting. No cameras waited. No crowd. Just the hiss of the rain, the click of his boots, and the heavy silence of a man who had been buried in plain sight and chose to rise without permission. Inside the SUV, Richard didn't close the door for a long time. He just sat there, dripping, stunned. A ghost had come back to haunt the empire they built on his back. But this ghost wasn't vengeful. He was untouchable, and he had the keys now.